Hello and welcome back to the course on blockchain. And today we're moving on to a new topic. We're talking about signatures, private and public keys. It's very interesting in blockchain how just as you think you've gotten your head around something, something else pops up. So we've already covered off transactions, UTXOs, fees, and the balance or how the wallet works. And now we're still in the space of transactions, but we've got a new angle at which we need to approach it. And let's do it. Let's get straight into it. All right, so this is where we left off previously. We understood what UTXOs are and how the balance, in quotation marks, is calculated, even though it actually doesn't exist. And that's all nice and well, but what this diagram or this illustration asks for is a question, and the question is of privacy. First of all, by looking at this blockchain and all the transactions, I can clearly see who's sending who money. Like Adlan sent me money here, Adlan sent me money here, and I can see where I'm spending it. I'm going to a bike shop, I'm going to a fruit shop, and more importantly, so there's no privacy in that sense, but more importantly, anybody can come in and for the next block submit a transaction where it says Adlan sends Sarah money. Even though Adlan and Sarah might have no idea about it, they can just put a transaction in like that. They can calculate their UTXO, so for instance, from the whole blockchain, calculate what Adlan's UTXO is, and just put it in there and say Adlan sends Sarah X amount, or Adlan sends the attacker X amount, which would make more sense. And so the question is, like, first of all, would that be possible? Yes, of course it would be possible. So what that person would do is they would submit that transaction, make sure they put it, like they just have to calculate that Adlan has the right UTXO, put it in there, and then broadcast it, put it in their mempool. The mempool would accept it because it would calculate that the correct UTXO exists, and then that would be broadcast to all the other mempools. The miners would accept it, and then it would be put into a block, and Adlan would lose the money. So the question is, how can we add privacy to this system? How does blockchain ensure privacy so that things like that don't happen, and so we don't see what's going on? Well, that happens from through private and public keys. Let's have a look. So when you start into cryptocurrency, you are assigned a private key, and that is like your unique identifier. That is like something that you never tell to anybody. That is just yours. That is like your password to your bank account. Then from the private key, you can generate a public key, and a public key is something you can actually share with others. That's how they will send you money, and that's how you will send them money. Well, you need your private key, as we'll see just now. You'll need your private key actually to send the money. So a public key is what you need to share with others for them to send you money. That's like the bank account, the number of your bank account. For now, let's just draw that analogy for now. You'll see that it's a bit more involved in that. So then let's say you want to send a message, and by message we can mean anything, like just text, or in the case of cryptocurrencies, it is the transaction. So by message, just let's understand transaction here. So you've come up with a transaction. Let's say Sarah sends Kirill 0.7 BTC. So there's a private key. You've come up with this transaction. Instead of putting it straight into a blockchain, how can you use the private and public key to make it secure and private? Well, the private key is combined with the message, and together they generate a signature. So basically, the private key is used to sign the message, and only you know the private key. So this is the key component, that only you know the private key, and therefore only this signature will be unique to you. And so this message will go always with this signature. So this transaction will travel with the signature, and therefore anybody who encounters this message will also encounter the signature, or encounters this transaction will also encounter the signature attached to it. The only question we have left now is, how can they verify that indeed it was you who signed this signature, who made this signature? Well, that's where the public key comes in. In blockchains, there is a verification function in the algorithm where anybody who has the message and the signature and your public key, which you've made public, it's not something you have to keep secret, only the private key you keep secret. Well, if they have all three components, they can put them into the verification function, and it will spit out a yes or no. So basically what it does is it uses the public key to assess the signature, and which is attached to the message, to assess the combination signature message, to confirm or deny or decline that this message was signed by this private key. So basically, the way to look at it is that even though from the public key you cannot reverse engineer the private key, like with everything what we're doing here, because uses the SHA-256. No, it doesn't use the SHA-256 function. It uses an elliptic function. It's a different function. But basically, just like with the SHA-256, very similar situation, that from the private key, you can always deterministically generate the public key, but you cannot reverse engineer the private key. So that's why you are free to share it. But the public key is used, and this function is designed in such a way that through the public key, you are able to perform this verification. You're able to say if this message indeed, if this signature for this message was indeed from the private key, which generated the public key. So even though this link is not reversible, it does allow for this to work properly. And so therefore, whenever you send a transaction on the blockchain, when you create a transaction, you will put the transaction into the blockchain, or basically you'll put the transaction to the mempool. But what will be attached always to the transaction is the signature and the public key. And then in the end, all of those components will end up on the blockchain. So always together, the message, the signature, and the public key will end up together. So that will allow for the nodes and the miners, for everybody to verify that indeed this transaction was initiated by the person who holds the private key. And that is sufficient verification that indeed Sarah wants to send Adlan money, or Adlan wants to send Sarah money, or whoever wants to send whoever money. Because, let's say if Sarah is sending Adlan money, then Sarah has her private key. She creates a transaction. Sarah sends Adlan 0.1 BTC. She signs that transaction, the signature attached. She has a public key. So all of the nodes in the network will use the verification function, and they'll apply it to these components, which come together, and they will see that indeed this signature was created by the same private key which issued this public key. And since this public key came from Sarah, it's attached to the message. There we go. That means this transaction was created by Sarah, indeed. And yeah, so that's why you definitely need to keep your private key safe. So that's the start of signatures, private and public keys. And in the further tutorials, we will delve deeper into this topic. Hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, enjoy blockchains.